I would like to extend a special welcome to each one of you this day. Thank you for joining us. This is Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio, and you are joining us in today's Africa. We go live every Saturday at 11 Eastern Standard Time. We are broadcasting in over 140 different countries around the world. And of course, in this global village where now information is at our fingertips, people can log in and connect with us from anywhere around the world as long as you have internet. And isn't it wonderful to know that things that would take a long time, I mean, from before, it would take a long time to communicate, and now we just do it like in real time. So again, this is your host, Dr. FM, Francis Munangi Mpindu, coming live at Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. And so, again, we are delighted that you have joined us. By the way, if for some reason you are not able to join us on any particular Saturday, feel free to log in and you will be able to access the show or the podcast of whatever, even from before. You can always join us anytime. And of course, we encourage you uh, to subscribe, to like, and to share the network within your own networks as well. We are on LinkedIn, we are on YouTube, and we are on Facebook, and of course, StreamYard. And so we're just delighted that you are with us today. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. We're glad you've joined us today. One of the things we're really excited about is when it comes to today's Africa, we touch on a variety of topics pertaining to Africa. Lively, healthy conversations, brave conversations, so that we are informed and not misinformed. And today we're going to be looking at the realities of race and tribal, you know, tribal groups, and of course we know that in Africa we have quite a variety of them. I was intrigued by the fact that Africa is home to over 3,000 different tribes and ethnic groups, and that we have over 2,100 languages. And of course, we know that these languages have been documented by other people, but there could be others that have not been documented. And of course, there's a difference between language and dialects. Most of these are languages, a unique language in a particular locale in Africa. And I was just amazed by what has been posted out there with regards to Africa, our tribes, and of course with the 54 55 different countries, we represent quite a diversity. And today we're going to be talking about that, basically to um, talk about tribal and racial realities. And we do have a special guest who apparently at the moment is having technical difficulties, but should be joining us any time really. And once he comes on, we would be able to resume our conversation. So again, tribal and racial realities. Like I said, I was intrigued to find out information that has been posted about Africa, and someone has done that. And sometimes you begin to wonder, um, you know, who posts, who puts the information out there, and for what purpose? It could be educational, but it can also be something that may uh, communicate certain things or certain nuances that may not necessarily be favorable to the people you are talking about. And so I think in this information age, it is important for us to understand that we want to have people, especially young people, especially when we consider from last week that. 70% of our population is below 30. I mean, this is amazing. This is wonderful. We are a young um, continent, but not young as in age. I mean, not young as in terms of longevity or how long we've been around. We've been around many thousands of years, but in terms of demographics, 70%, 70% of the population of Africa is below 30 years old. And so this is exciting. So again, I'd like to invite our young people and young adults to be creative and to put out information there about Africa that would help in terms of who we are, what Africa is, and what kinds of contributions we have made. So here are some things that I found out after reading something about Africa and the different tribes and ethnic groups. I was surprised to find out there is a list, or there are some lists that have been posted out there uh, with regards to the most educated, and I found that very fascinating. Most educated, uh, the most friendliest tribe, the most beautiful tribe, uh, the most riches, the most whitest, the most strongest, the biggest, the tallest, and the list just went on and on and on and on. And I was just fascinated by that. And I was like, wow, someone has taken time to want to compile a list of this nature. And so my question was, by whose standard are we measuring this, or are we making these comparisons? Like I said earlier, sometimes we forget that when we talk about certain people, we want to make sure, when we talk about other people, we want to make sure that we are representing them well. And of course, on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio, that's what we try to do, to have guests come in and we uh, dialogue on a particular topic to obtain information that will help us. So we usually think of the 3Ds: we dialogue, to discover, so that we decide on the next steps. And then I say to myself, if there are tribes in Africa, and there are, and they have always been. By the way, generally in Africa, we are very theocentric. We believe that the Creator, God, has created us, that we did not make ourselves. And of course, within that context, we understand that life comes from God, but culture is man made. We navigate through experiences and understandings and make meaning out of our own life experiences. And that's how culture is established. So life is God given, is God made, culture is man made. That's why we have varieties of cultures around the world. And so I say to myself, given the fact that we have all these over 3,000 different tribes and languages, um, we also understand that there are European tribes. Those of you in North America, when you think of Canada and the US, they came from Europe. The European settlers or voyageurs who traveled. They traveled from Europe. They left their European tribes and came and established new tribes, so to speak. And so there's quite a variety of European tribes. And of course, when we think of all the various European countries, those actually represent tribes, even though the word tribe is hardly used, which is really sad because they are tribes. I was intrigued by a comment that Professor Lumumba, PLO, said at one point. He said, it's interesting how some people talk about tribal wars, and yet when it comes to other wars, we call them World War One and World War Two. And he says, okay, what makes them world war? And yet, in most of these, they were really tribal wars. It was just tribes fighting against each other. But that was then expanded into, oh, this is now a world war. But it wasn't the whole world at war. It was these tribes that were at loggerheads. And so it's interesting how sometimes words are used in ways that favor ourselves. I remember, what do they call that? The theory of attribution, where we don't necessarily use the same standard for ourselves, um, but we use a different standard for other people. And then when it comes to us, we try to shift. So I just was fascinated by all this information, and of course the European tribes. Even though sometimes they like to refer to themselves as nations and cultures, but really they are tribes, just like um, the tribes that we find in Africa. So we have the Goths, the Ostrogoths, uh, the Visigoths, the Franks, the Jutes, the Saxons, the Lombards, the Vandals, and I mean they're all these tribes, European tribes, and it is important that we accept that. It's important that we understand that we are. Uh, they are tribes just like any other tribes that we find around the world. And it is unfortunate that oftentimes we try to use different ways to um, explain ourselves, and yet it is really the same. So in this global village, we're glad that we have varieties of cultures, different expressions, and different experiences. And so we are still waiting for our guest, who I said is having technical difficulties, but we are really hoping that um, he will be able to log in. And of course, our engineer, Mr. Theo, is working with him at this point as well. So again, this is today's Africa on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We are delighted that you have joined us, and we're looking forward to a dialogue on tribal and racial realities. And this is a topic that is really relevant, and it's very, very current, because even when we look at some of the things that are happening in our continent, the continent of Africa, we have elections. Different leaders of nations are voted in, and most of the time, maybe I shouldn't say most of the time, many times, where the leader is coming from becomes something to talk about. It becomes a way of determining whether someone is legit or not, which is very, very unfortunate. And I'm really grateful for um, some nations in Africa where your tribe is recognized, and yet it's not put in the forefront when it comes to leading the country and what is happening around the country. And one of those countries is Tanzania. In Tanzania, it was established from the very, very beginning And I don't think they were doing away with tribes or the ethnic groups, but there was something that just brought the nation together with regards to unity and coming together and forming a nation where you come from and your tribe is not that important. It is recognized, it is acknowledged, but it's not a token into any leadership positions. And some of us might be in different parts of Africa where those nuances of tribes and ethnicity are not put in the forefront. And so please feel free to share so that we know what is happening in your own country as well. I see that our guest just showed up briefly. I was just about to say he's here, but looks like we're pretty close now. Our brother Theo has been working hard to make sure that our brother Barry Durman gets connected, and I see him now. It's a solid appearance, so I take it that we are connected now. So again, this is today's Africa Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. I am your host, Dr. FM, Dr. Francis Munangi Mpindu, and we're delighted that you've joined us. And like I said, we go live every Saturday at 11 Eastern Standard Time, and we are live in over 140 different countries. And today we are delighted to have, I call him Mkoma Berry. Mkoma is a Shona word that means big brother. So it's a very affectionate term. And so, in a moment, we will have him introduce himself to us and let us know who he is. And then we will get into the details in a little while. Just before you came on, we were just talking about the importance of understanding our differences and yet knowing that there is life beyond our differences. And a friend of mine was commenting, they said, "Oh, this is very, very interesting, Dr. Francis, that you would bring in someone who is not African." And I said, "What makes you think he is not African?" So I guess that will be something I'm looking forward to in terms of your understanding of that. And so, um, Barry Durman, we're just delighted you have joined us today, and thank you for making us, for making us a priority on a Saturday morning. You could be doing other things, but you have decided to be with us. So, please tell us, who is Barry Durman?
Well, first, let me apologize. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and
Okay.
clear.
Let me apologize for the delay. I've been trying to get you on my laptop and dealing with your private chat and all that kind of thing, but finally I decided let me try my phone. So the phone seems to be superior to my laptop. Anyway, I'm here, and I'm pleased to be here. It's good to see you, Francis.
Thank you.
It's many years of a relationship, and I'm excited to be with you on this dialogue. Who is Barry Durman? Very interesting question. I often question that myself. Uh, um, Born in, I guess I should say, Harare, Zimbabwe. It was Salisbury, Rhodesia back then, and born to a mother and father who were very involved in the church. It was the Salvation Army at that point. Both of their parents, both sets of my grandparents, were missionaries to Africa from England with the Salvation Army. My mother's parents were in Tanganyika or Tanzania, and my father's parents were to Rhodesia. And so that's where I was born. My father worked in a printing and publishing world. Um, I attended school in Rhodesia up through high school, really, after my O levels, and I won't tell you how I did on them because it's very embarrassing. Um, and at that point, my father, being involved in the printing and publishing world, had insight into what was being censored from the newspapers because Rhodesia was about to declare independence from England. And so, having experienced what happened in the Congo, when they declared independence, my father decided he would engage in a journey to get his family out of Rhodesia at the time. Tried thinking about going to England. That didn't sit well, so they decided to emigrate to the United States. And I was 16 at that point. So I have 16 years of experience as a child in Zimbabwe. And then my wife and I met in Bible college, and we felt the Lord calling us to go back to Zimbabwe as missionaries. And so we did, and it was during that delightful time that I got to meet you, my friend. Um, uh, you were a part of a youth group, and we had many activities together for the 2 years that I was there as a missionary. Since then, I've been very involved in Christian work, mostly on the fundraising side. I did have a delightful experience in Atlantic City, New Jersey, running a homeless shelter. That being a casino town made it a very interesting environment. Since then, worked for a number of different ministries, raising money so that their work could continue. That's about it in a nutshell.
Thank you very much for such a wonderful summary. I mean, you mentioned quite a number of things that are very, very intriguing and very, very exciting. And actually, you know what? I wasn't aware that your parents um, were were missionaries
Well,
and
my
coming.
parents,
I mean,
my
coming out of a missionary background.
yes, that's correct.
Yes,
Yeah.
coming out of a missionary background and Salvation Army. That's very fascinating, and it doesn't surprise me how you ended up. I mean, knowing from your resume and all that the different work that you have done over the years that is related to helping the needy, meeting the needs of people, which is very much Salvation Army
Hmm.
focus around the globe, and that is just commendable. So you are one of those European tribes, according to what you just told us. I was just saying earlier that it's interesting how the word tribes has been used with reference to Africa, but sometimes we don't think of the European tribes because they really are tribes. I was just talking about, the Goths, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, the Franks, the Jutes, the Saxons, the Lombards, the Vandals, and they actually have a map of European tribes, and I'm like, wow, this is fascinating because indeed they are tribes. Now, just with regards to your own experiences growing up in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, up until you were 16, and then you moved. Um, what 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 was life like for you at that point? Because, of course, at that point you're thinking, you know, Ian Smith was going to declare independence from England, of course, bringing changes and uncertainty to so many people. So, what was life like for you growing up?
It was delightful. We lived in one of the suburbs, Belvedere. I don't know what it's called now, if it's changed.
It's still
Uh,
Belvedere, I
oh, is it?
understand. Yep.
Okay. Okay. My father built a house on Wendy Loop, which I believe is still called Wendy Loop or something like that. I've looked it up on the satellite with Google, and it still seems to be there. But it was wonderful. Schooling, uh, I'm a very social person, so I enjoyed the schooling there and rode my bicycle to school every day. I did have a 5 year experience of living in Ndola up in what was northern Rhodesia, now Zambia. My father ran a printing works up there for 5 years, so I have a little bit of experience of living there too. But it was a delightful time. We had the freedom to travel wherever we wanted. Again, as a young child, riding my bicycle almost anywhere, rode out to Lake McIlwain, which was quite an adventure. We used to stay on a borrowed cabin cruiser for a week at a time, a friend and I, and just enjoyed exploring. So it was a delightful time at that point. I have very good memories.
I'm actually intrigued to learn that this thing with bicycles is something that has been part of you from way back when. Could you tell us a little bit in terms of your, you know, passion or hobby, as in cycling and all that, and what you're doing now, and what some of the things that you have done?
Yeah, uh, cycling in Rhodesia or Zimbabwe was really a necessity to get from point A to point B. I had a typical, what I would call African bicycle, very heavy, uh, black bicycle with fenders. Uh, when I moved to this country, cycling dropped away a little bit because that was not a necessity for getting from wherever I was to where I wanted to be. But I did pick it up. We lived in central New Jersey for a while, and there was a young man who came and worked with us at the Addiction Recovery Center where I was working, and he had been almost professional. And so I said, "Well, let me go out for a ride with you." And I realized what it meant, how badly out of shape I was. Um, so I improved that summer. I bought a new bicycle and started riding with him a little bit more and got in shape pretty quickly and enjoyed it. And so for 45 years now, 40, no, it's 41 years now, I've been riding seriously almost daily. Enjoy it a lot. It is a passion. I have raced a few times, and that's always my competitive side comes out, and I enjoy that. Right now, I ride probably 100 to 120 miles a week, mostly in this weather. We just came out of a freezing period. I do that inside on a trainer, but during the rest of the year, I'm out on the road. I'm one of those guys that you see with the lycra shorts and shirt and the helmet and the clipped in shoes and all that, those strange birds that are out there. That's me.
Interesting. I just wanted us to go back to that early life, and of course, you said that you lived in Belvedere, and of course, going to school there, with all the another announcements that were coming in terms of the future of the country and all that. Now, within that environment, how would you describe the relationships, say within the um, white community and the black community? How would you describe what was happening?
Well, it was. I think how most of your listeners would remember, there was definitely a white community and a non-white community. We did have two gentlemen that would work for us. One would work inside the house, Africans, and one would work in the garden. It was just the way of life. Um, we, my parents were involved in going into the townships with the Salvation Army. My father taught people how Africans how to play band instruments. The Salvation Army band instruments. My mother would work with the women in their sewing and have Bible studies with them. So they were pretty involved. My father always used to joke that missionaries were paid to be good and he was good for nothing. But they were pretty involved in the church and in the outreach that we had. But living life back then, I wasn't conscious of the racial divide because that was just how it was. That was how
Mhm.
it always had been for me in my 16 years. Now, when we went back as missionaries, there was a very different perspective. I had
That's
grown up a little
that's
bit by then.
yeah, that's right. Actually, we will get into that in a few
Okay.
minutes. The reason I was asking it's because I am I am wondering because your parents going into the townships to connect with people, that wasn't something that the government would have readily said you can do that. In fact, I know even later on that there were restrictions in terms of you can only go in during this time, you shouldn't be there during that time. And of course, there were various reasons for that. But for them to decide to do that and to go and equip the local people with skills to play instruments and to have an appreciation for what should I say, structured music. That was quite a decision on on their part. I mean, obviously, that displays a willingness to meet the needs of people and going out of their way to connect with people, and that is commendable. I just wanted to mention that. I mean, I'm familiar with some of the restrictions that were there, and yet they would decide to do that. So that's really encouraging for me to it's encouraging for us to hear that even back then you had people who were committed to meeting the needs of people.
I don't know if the restrictions were the same back in the 50s and 60s as they were later on. I'm not conscious of those restrictions. I don't remember my parents saying, well, we have to be home by a certain time or anything like that, or we have to be out of the townships by a certain time. It very likely is true. But that was, again, that was something that I just was not aware of at that time. I went out with them on a number of occasions. I remember going out and playing cornet solos, and as a young boy, and just being engaged with them in that way. My father organized for an American Salvation Army to send all of their instruments over so that we could start a band over there. And I remember going to the dedication of that with the African people involved um, in thanking the Lord for the gift that they received of these instruments.
Hmm. Well, this is exciting. I mean, it's really encouraging to hear about these stories, and of course, our listeners, our viewers, you are tuned in to today's Africa uh, on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio, and we're talking about tribal and racial realities. That there are realities. I was talking to a friend once with York Regional Police in Canada, and he was saying he went to a function. He is originally from Trinidad. So he said he went to a function where he heard someone say, well, I don't see color, I don't see differences. And to which my friend who was at that point a very, very senior, I think he was a deputy chief, he said, sir, if you don't see color, then you're not seeing me.
Mm.
And of course, that started a different conversation altogether. So,
Sure.
really, differences are there, and these are real. And I want us to move forward a little bit and talk about the time that you came back and I got to know you. One of the things that I found fascinating is when you came into our part of the city, you guys came to play soccer, to play football with us. And uh, it was wonderful to see character in the sports. To me, that's one of the things that stood out, just character. Because when you play some of these sports, people can really be crude. I mean, they can tackle people and just be really rough. But there was just something there that showed a character and a willingness to connect with people at a totally different level. Now, what made that change for you in terms of wanting to go back to a place that you knew was no longer what it was before, and yet you were going back as a missionary to work with the local people? What happened? How did you end up back there?
Well, it was definitely at that time a calling that we felt the Lord had, God had wanted us to do it. Of course, it was very easy for me to want to go back. I had a lot of good memories. I had my wife and I, Joanne and I, had actually gone back to Rhodesia on a singing tour. We had a small singing group. We were with the Africa Evangelical Fellowship at that time, and they sent us out to Salisbury and then down to South Africa for a number of weeks to hold evangelistic services and to sing and entertain. And so Joanne had seen Rhodesia. She knew what to expect to a certain degree in going back full time. But it was our desire. The Africa Evangelical Fellowship at that time wanted us to plant a church, and so in the African township. So there was a couple working out there. You probably remember the Rainsbergers, Tom and Ione. We went to work with them to establish the church, and so that's what took us out there. I was more focused on working with the young people, and Tom and Ione were more focused on the adults. So it worked as a good team. And so, of course, I went over to your school, and that's where I met Noah. And what was your relationship with Noah at that time? Were you in his band, in his marimba band?
No, I was actually part of the high school senior soccer team, so he was our coach.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And I should tell you on national and global television that he was known to be a rough guy. And
Yes.
not too many people wanted to be close to him. And of course, when he accepted the Lord and had this conversion experience, that was a powerful change that we all saw and realized that something had happened. And I know you were instrumental in connecting him to his creator and all that. And I'm actually hoping that one of these days I would like to have him come and share. He's working with a number of ministries now, including teaching at the University of Zimbabwe. He's doing
Right.
chaplaincy ministry and all that. So I'm hoping that he will be able to come in and tell us what's happening with chaplaincy and all that. But yes, you are right. So talking about that, you coming back as a missionary back into a nation that you knew about and you said you had good memories about. And I'm also aware that for us as local people, when we saw you as a tribe, you and Tom, we also realized that there were differences. But I am more interested in finding out on behalf of our listeners and viewers, just in terms of how you viewed you mentioned the word calling. There was a calling there in terms of why you went back. And the reason we're doing this, I really believe that it's important for us to appreciate history and know that sometimes we paint everybody with the same brush. For example, I was raised in an environment that said, whites don't like you,
Hmm.
so stay away from them. They are, I mean, they would say all kinds of names. So then for me to see you come into my high school where there were no white children, that really surprised me.
Mm.
I'm like, what is this tall guy doing in my high school and he is white?
This Murungu.
Murungu, you know. In Swahili they say Muzungu.
That's right.
Yeah, and so I'm talking about this because I think it's important for us to know that differences are there, but we need to be careful that we're not painting everybody with the same brush. Just
Right.
as Dr. Martin Luther King says, we must not, have a distrust for all white people, as evidenced in our gathering here today, that we are all created equal. So there is a sense in which there's equality, but also differences in terms of expression. So for you coming into that environment, I mean, it was a choice. It was a decision. You could have gone somewhere else. You could have gone to another high school where, there were people who looked like you, but you decided to do this. So would you just share a little bit in terms of, oh, it wasn't even conscious. Like I know you mentioned this before. You just said, I wasn't really conscious of that, but I did that. But, tell us a little bit in terms of how that journey went for you in terms of connecting.
Well, when we applied for a place to build a church, it was right across from the school. So while I was, we actually digging the foundations, Tom and I personally started digging the foundations of the church, which I think made an impact on the people living in the area. What are these white people doing digging holes here? Um, I wandered over because I heard the marimba band playing. And that's how I connected with the students. And I looked in the window and I was a white face looking in. And I think Noah kind of took a step back and said, "What's this?" And that was the beginning of our relationship. But an interesting story that I remember from when I visited you in Canada. I don't know if you remember this, but when I heard that Noah was coming to visit you in Canada, I made arrangements to come up and join you just for a reunion. And you both picked me up at the airport, and we were driving back to your home to Hasadzana Murio, and which I love. Um, and the question that Noah asked me was, "Barry, where are you from?" So I said, "Well, I'm from Zimbabwe." And he said, "No, no, no, no. Where were you born? Where in America were you born?" And I said, "No, I was born in Harare." And he said, "If I had known that you were a white Rhodesian, I would have never listened to you." Which I think speaks somewhat to this topic of today. Because I was perceived to be an American, an outsider, a non-political person, and I wasn't, I'm still not that way, um, it was okay to listen to me. But it was assumed that if I was a white Rhodesian, that I had another agenda. And I think that speaks loudly to what the situation was even in the 70s when we were there as missionaries. We were there from 75 to 77 and very young and green and learning a lot at that time. But I think that illustrates, and we had some discussion around that, which was very interesting.
You know what? I'm really delighted you mentioned this, and it just conjures up quite quite a number of thoughts. You were right. I remember that conversation, and I also remembered when I first saw you, and I said, "This white guy doesn't sound Rhodesian or doesn't sound Zimbabwean." And I guess at that point, I mean, you had grown up and moved
Mm-hmm.
on, and so you're a combination of the British, the Rhodesian, and now
New
the
Jersey.
American, the New Jerseyan accent. And I said, this American guy, in my school, and we used to say that these American guys, they talk like they have water in their mouths, like they are rolling words,
Yeah.
rolling. And so yeah, I was fascinated by that, and I said, "Wow." And then when Dr. Pashapa mentioned that as well, that if I had known that you were this, I would not have listened to you. And yet, in all this, there is an evidence of the divine guidance and the connectivity that brought you into this relationship with him and with us in such a way that there was something there within you. And I think um, I let me see if I can extract this from you. At what point did you start looking at this school that was the black school as an opportunity to build relationships? Yes, you came as a missionary, but you were not from that neighborhood. And then you started working with different people as well. Let me tell you why I am also asking this. I really feel that between the two of you, um, our brother Tom and our brother Barry, there were differences in terms of approach and how you were connecting with people. We saw that.
Mm.
It was so evident, and I don't think anybody, maybe somebody has told you that. It was evident that how you approached uh, relationships was different from how our brother, and may his soul rest in peace,
Yes.
both of you, the respected guys, you made a commitment to come, but there was a difference there. What made the difference for you?
I think a little bit speaks to my understanding of the African culture that I acquired in growing up. And I think what you observed may have been Tom wrestling with understanding the culture, thinking he had to behave in a certain way in order to build those relationships. Whereas I, knowing a little bit more about, uh, for instance, the Shona language, I never learned it to the degree that I would love to have learned it. Joanne was much
By
better at
by the way, sorry for interrupting. Someone in New York City said, "Does your guest speak any of the languages?"
it. Just a few words. I haven't
Basic.
used it. Haven't used it in so long, but the um, I think understanding the culture made it different for me than it did for Tom. Um, just as an illustration, we decided we wanted all the families to sit together in church rather than the men on one side and the women on the other side and the children down front. That did not go over very well because it's not your culture. It wasn't the culture of the people we were meeting with, and but that was an effort, I think, for um, reaching people in a way that we thought they should be reached, rather than understanding the culture and moving forward within those boundaries.
Hmm. That is you're absolutely right, and I think our sister Beryl in New York City is alluding to this. Um, you had an understanding of the culture that made you approach people differently, and um, the realities, and I think that's in keeping with what we're talking about. The realities is you were both white, but different in terms of approach because you
Mm.
had gone through some things that had um did I say you were white? You're still white, right?
I think so.
Why did I say that? Anyway, so being who you are, there was something there from your own upbringing and growing up that made you relate to people. And I think this also takes me back to the conversations I had with Lynn and Judy Eversweek,
Hmm.
because Lynn grew up in Zimbabwe as a little boy playing with the local people, you know. And so there was something there. I remember mentioning it to a friend who said, "Oh, those guys were very, very friendly."
Hmm.
And I still remember that about you, that you guys were very friendly. You were approachable, even though you are of a different race. And I think there is something that we need to embrace that if there is an understanding of culture and appreciation of people, something happens in terms of how we connect. Because when we say the Mukoma Berry, Big Brother Berry, we really meant that.
Hmm.
It was like, I know him, we have a relationship. And I think part of what's happening now is there's fear and misunderstanding. And so as a result, relationships are really punctured and very dysfunctional because we just don't trust one another. And I should fast forward a little bit and actually also say that I think part of the dynamics you made reference to in terms of a suggestion not going very well because it wasn't the culture, we also felt like there were some things that could have been done differently if our brother and his team had actually listened to some of the suggestions we had made.
Hmm.
For example, there were three guys who went for training, and I think there was a decision made, oh, well, we can only have this one and not this one because, and we got to know the reasons behind all that. And that did not go very well either because it
No.
was like, oh, okay, now you're making decisions for us, and yet this is a work that is supposed to be led by us. How come we're not part of the conversation? But
I remember that situation.
so that's actually something that at some point, by the way, Barry, we never bring somebody once and we never see them again. So there will be a part two to this so that we can
Okay.
have a conversation in terms of dynamics and all that. But, our viewers and listeners, this is today's Africa on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio with your host, Dr. FM. And we are talking about tribal and racial realities here. We have established that there are tribes in Africa, over 3,000 tribes and ethnic groups in Africa, and of course, with 2,100 different languages. And there are also tribes in Europe. I was fascinated by what Professor Lumumba, who is one of our uh, Voice of Africa individual. He is situated in, in Kenya, and he says it's interesting how the Europeans look at their tribal wars and they become world wars. When Africans have their wars, they become tribal wars. And he says we are all in tribes,
Hmm. Yeah,
you
that's
know,
true.
and so
When
it is important for us. Yes, Barry, go ahead.
when we moved up to northern Rhodesia, up to Ndola, um, the gentleman who was working for us in our house uh, went with us. Now he was Shona, and when we moved up there, uh, he only lasted a couple of months because he was not welcome by the Africans up there. He would come home after his day off and having been beaten up and so forth. So we sent him back to Harare.
Are you
Um,
are you saying that the Zambians were not welcoming him?
Correct. Well, he would go to the clubs or the beer halls and would end up in a fight because he was not of the local area. So there was even that racial divide between Africans that he experienced. Now, the good news was when we traveled back and moved back to Salisbury, he found out we were coming back and he was sitting on the step waiting for us. And
Oh,
he,
that's
he again worked for us.
wonderful.
Yeah, yeah.
That's beautiful.
But that may be
Uh,
something we can explore further, maybe if we get together
Jeff,
again.
definitely we will. Barry, we will. And this is not a threat, it's a promise. So we will have a second part for sure.
Okay.
Interesting topic, Tatenda says, and is listening from Johannesburg. And we also have Marcel in Montreal, in Canada, who says, I'm a first time listener. So merci beaucoup, Marcel. It's
And
really wonderful to have this conversation with you, and I know that we kind of started late, and so I might have to keep you just a few more minutes because you were having technical difficulties, so
yes,
it's not really my
it was
fault.
my end. It was my end. Absolutely.
But thank you so much for making time to be with us. It's really interesting you mentioned this, and I think it just confirms what we're talking about, the realities of our differences, and yet oftentimes we make those differences so big that we overlook the fact that we are on the same team.
Hmm.
And it's something that when I look back my own upbringing and the experience I had. By the way, I'm sure you are aware of this, that when I went to Prairie College, I was surprised to find Ione Rensberger there.
Hmm.
And she looked at me and she said, "Oh my goodness, when I heard you were coming, I just said, I hope that Francis has grown." And I said, "That's a compliment and I'll take it." And then I said to her, "When I heard that you were on staff, I said to myself, I really hope that Mrs. Rensberger has grown." And we both cried together because we knew what that meant.
Yes.
Because then we realized there's more to life than our differences, and it is possible for us to work together. Our engineer has just given us an additional 10 minutes, so
Oh,
I really
wonderful.
want us to just go back a little and talk about you worked with different organizations that were serving missionaries globally. SIM is big,
Yes.
and they have over 4,000 missionaries around the world. And then you worked with uh, rescue mission with homeless people and all that. And so, did you ever get a chance to visit some of the sites, to be out there, or it was mostly just doing stuff in the background so that they would go?
No, I did get the opportunity to travel with missionaries to experience where they were working and to learn more about how I could help them by being able to communicate with potential donors. So I did visit Albania, which was a very interesting experience. I went to India and again learned so much about the culture there, and we actually did house to house visitation up in the northeastern area near China, where people live in huts on stilts because of the flooding they get. I took 7 young men to Tanzania and Kenya to do ministry. We did that for 2 weeks as a good trip. Um, so yeah, I've had the opportunity to travel around. I went down to Bolivia and experienced the highlands because that is very high elevation there, and to learn about what we did there. I'm trying to think if there was anywhere else of interest um, that I visited, but yes, no, I've been very blessed to have experience worldwide in seeing people of different cultures and all having the same needs, just needing to have it delivered differently.
Hmm. Now, Barry, I'm going to put you on the spot here and say that if you were to speak to someone, uh, I don't know how your missiology stands now, whether you still look at missionaries are needed globally, and churches in North America and in Europe can still send missionaries to Africa, or whether Africa now needs to come to Europe and North America. I'm not too sure where you stand on that. But if you were to speak to someone who is planning to go, what are some of key things that come to mind in terms of the racial and tribal realities, and just ministry, the realities of ministry? Sorry, just the realities of ministry and relationships dynamics. What comes to mind?
Well, I think going back to what you perceived as the difference between Tom and myself in approaching our work as missionaries, it takes years and years and years to acclimate to the various cultures that you may be experiencing. It's not something you're going to get in the first 4 or 5 years that you're there. Um, so I think just alerting people to that, having that on their radar so that they understand I can't take my American culture with me and expect that to be what's accepted by Indians, Africans, Asians, South Americans, whomever, because of the differences. I think the other thing is to tread slowly. Um, don't go in like a ball of fire and expect changes. I know of missionaries with SIM that have been on the field for um, many years. I'm talking 40 years, 50 years, who've only seen a handful of people come to know the Lord, but they stuck it out faithfully because every one of the people that they had opportunity to live with and experience life with uh, needed to hear and see the gospel in their lives. So I think those are probably the most important things that I would stress. Um, and I think it's the same here. If you're going to work in downtown Dallas, it's going to be different than if you're going to work in Frisco, which is an hour north, because of the difference in the environment. Um, so that would be my number one issue.
Those are really profound insights you have shared, and it is unfortunate. I think that sometimes people have good intentions, but when you lack skill, your good intentions can be or will be misunderstood, and you miss out opportunities to impact lives. Yes, we know the grace of God is evident, and sometimes He works in spite of us. And there are times that He just overrides and does some amazing things through us, even in our limitations and in our infirmities and weaknesses. But you just mentioned something really profound there, saying that it takes time to climatize, and so it's important when you're going to be in a different environment to learn to connect with people in their own environment. And then you also talked about don't go like a ball of fire, tread slowly. That's really wonderful. um,
I think the other thing you broached the subject of whether we should be sending missionaries overseas or whether people from Africa and India and China should be coming here as missionaries. I'm all for both of those because I think God uses different people in different ways to accomplish His goals for His kingdom. And if I remember when Noah came over to Dallas to visit some of his parishioners who had moved here, he and I spent some time together, and I would have loved him to move here because there are many people who would benefit from his ministry here in this environment. So yeah, it just depends on God's call on your life and your willingness to obey.
hmm. That's really powerful, and you're absolutely right. I think you hit the nail on the head right there. That it's. I mean, because of the realities of this global village, there are opportunities all over, and I think based on a calling, a passion, a skill, you can be placed anywhere, really, to be able to serve there. And I think you also alluded to this, that we cross pollinate, we learn from each other in ways that enhances our lives. And every time that happens, we are better people because of our relationships. And I said this, I believe, to Lynn Everswick when we parted. I said, sometimes we, as an African myself, um, the dangers of just lumping everybody together and painting everybody with the same brush. It's very natural. It's very easy for us to do that, and yet sometimes we forget to just look back and realize there were people who were really dedicated and committed to doing the best they could to serve, and God used them to enrich other people's lives, and those lives have never been the same. And so I would like to say, on behalf of Youth Alive, on
Hmm.
behalf of AEF, we thank you and Joanne for making time to come and be in Africa, even for those few years, even though it was going back for you, for those few years, to connect with young people. Many of those young people, they are involved in so many ministries around the world now and on the continent of Africa. And so, even though you're no longer there, the impact is still there. And I think this will be a good note for us to end on, that sometimes we are in a place for a season and we don't understand why. And yet, God, in His economy, we talk about synchronicities. God brings us together for various reasons, even beyond what we know, and there's a bigger vision and calling behind that. And so when we come back next time, like I
Okay.
said, it's not a threat, it's a promise. We will talk about dynamics in terms of just resolving issues and different perspectives and processing and all that. I think it's important for us to to uh, to talk about that, and you would be the best person for us to bring back. And who knows, I might even bring another host or co-host with me so that we can fire more questions at you. No, we won't do that. But thank you so much,
Well, thank you.
Barry Durman.
Thank
We
you for
really
the
appreciate
opportunity.
this. Yeah. Again, you have been with us here on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. This is your host, Dr. FM, and we're delighted that we've had this opportunity to be with Barry Durman. He has done a lot of professional development, a lot of raising funds for various organizations so that they would go, for nonprofit organizations, so that they would go and serve in different parts and around the world and also in Africa. And so our today's Africa has had this focus on just bringing someone who has this connection, born there. And maybe I think these are some of the questions we can ask ourselves and say, okay, when someone says I am African, what do they mean? Is that up for debate, or is it something that's finalized? You are African, you're not African. And I know in other parts of the world they're having these discussions as well. If you were born in the US, does that mean you become an American? Or no, you're not, because your parents are from a different country altogether. So should we say the same thing with people like Barry? Hey, Barry, your parents were from Europe. So even though you were born in Zimbabwe, you are not Zimbabwean. So I think that would be interesting conversations to have. But we're really delighted that you joined us today, and thank you for joining us on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. And we just want you to know that we go live every Saturday at 11 Eastern Standard Time on Saturdays, every Saturday. And so please, viewers and listeners, subscribe, like, and share this channel within your own tribe, within your own tribes, your own networks. One African American lady in New York told me this, and she says, everybody on my network, that's my tribe. And I said, I like that. So we are all in this global village with different tribes. Again, thank you for being with us today. And to our engineer, Mr. Theo, and Miss Janice, thank you very much for making this possible so that we have these conversations. So we will see you again next week, God willing.